CSS, how NPM works, and finally we'll start with React. And I'm covering the Vanilla.js topic because I want to show you the contrast that you get from shifting from Vanilla.js to React based to library like React or a framework like Angular or Vue. So I'll just start by sharing my screen. All right, so this was a project that we were working on yesterday, and I hope that every like all of you have the code, like all of the code that we covered yesterday, or even if you worked on the whole page by your own, I hope that you have some version of it so that we can start adding dynamic content to it now. So in order to add any kind of JavaScript, I'll first of all add a script.js file, and inside the index.html at the very end, I'll add a script tag. All right, and I'll do an src of uh, script.js. Okay, and let's see if this is working or not. So I'll just do a console.log of hey, and I'll start the live server again. Okay, so if I go into my inspect element, and since I logged it to the console, I must see hey in my console here, right? So the script is working. So we can now start adding some JavaScript to our page. So a very simple an interaction that I want to show you right now is that when I click on these buttons, this location changes to some other location. So the locations that I want to show here, we can just take an array of elements. And so like if you are familiar with any other programming languages, these terms that I'm covering today would be very very familiar to you. So in order to have those different locations, I'll just store them in an array, and then I'll use that array to show the correct location based on the button clicks. So let's just start by making that array first of all. So in JavaScript, we can make a constant array, like an array that is not going to change later on using a const keyword. So I'll just do const locations equals to, and this is an array. So inside here, I'll do New York, US, and the other thing that I want to add is, okay, this would be Kolkata, WB, and one more if I want to add Chennai, TN, okay. So let's just assume that these are the locations that the user has added to this page. Okay. So now I need to find some way to when I click on these buttons, like the JavaScript is able to execute some code regarding those button clicks, right? So inside JavaScript, what we have is called event listeners. So basically, any kind of user interaction, means that an event has happened in the backend of the browser, right? So these events can be listened to using the event listeners, and then whenever these events happen, you can basically instruct the page to execute some piece of code pertaining to that particular event for a particular element. So for these elements, I'll use the event that is called the click event. So this is how we do that. First of all, we need to know which buttons we want to attach the event to, right? So the buttons, these buttons over here are inside the aside tag, and this is the button tag. This is for the right button, and this is for the left button, right? So inside the left button, I'll add an ID of button left, and inside the right button, I'll add an ID of button right. You need not follow this part, although if you want, you can do that. I mean, I'm just showing this to you just to make you understand like how JavaScript and making something with JavaScript and making something completely in React is different. So once we have these buttons over here, we can come over to a JavaScript file, and we can get the reference of these buttons. We can basically store these buttons inside a variable. So inside here, I'll write button left equals to, and then we do document dot, and we get that button by its ID. So get element by ID, and the ID that we specified over here. over there. So that is button left, and similarly button right. Okay. So once we have those button elements inside a JavaScript file, like in the JavaScript context, to be precise, we can attach events to these buttons. So the way we do it is by writing button left dot add event listener, and we can specify. So the first thing that it asks for is just like importing modules with a specific names we want in Python. Yeah, I mean, not exactly that. We are not importing anything here. We are getting the reference to those buttons. So it's like getting, like just like in C, when we get the reference to a memory location using pointers, we are getting a reference to these button locations using these variables. So the first parameter that you see here is basically the type of the event. So in here you'll see that there are a lot of events, right? So but I want to work with the click event, so I'll add that. And the second thing that you see is the listener. So the listener is basically a function which executes when this event happens. Okay, so there are two ways to write functions in JavaScript, and there is a tiny difference between them, but currently we do not need to worry about that difference. So the first way is to write function and then the parameters of the function and then curly braces. And the other way, the shorthand, it's the newer way in ES6. It's the new version of JavaScript basically in layman terms. So in the newer version, you can write an arrow function using this syntax. So you put a set of round brackets and then a set of parentheses, and inside the round brackets you can specify the parameters of that function. Okay, so the parameters of the add event listener function is basically an event. Okay, so this event parameter stores everything related to the click event. So if I want to console log this, I can do that, and I can see what E actually holds over here. Okay, so this was for button left, right? So if I go back to my web page and click on this button, I'll see that it logged something to the console. And this is basically the whole event. It contains a lot of information regarding to the event itself and also regarding to the target on which the event happened. So you can see the target is saying SVG, and that is where the event happened, right? So that is what it's showing over here as well. So now we can start doing something meaningful using this basically event listener instead of just logging the event. So what I want to do, when I press the left button, I want to reduce a variable by one. That is basically variable will basically be the index which is currently active. Okay, so what I mean by that is, let's just create a variable here. Let active location equals to, and at starting I want this to be 0 because I want this to be the first element of the array. Okay, and in the left event listener I want, okay, just let's first put it at 1. Okay, so in the left event listener, what I want to do is I want to subtract 1 from this value. So we can do minus minus. Okay, and this will basically reduce this value by 1. So now whenever I click that button, this active location value will reduce by 1. But now we need to do something with it, and we need to show it on the screen, right? So the way we do it is by getting a reference to this region where the text actually is present. Okay, similar to how we got the reference to those buttons, we get the reference to this text here. So this text is a div element, and inside there we have the text itself, right? So again, to get a reference to the text, I'll assign an ID to it, and I'll call it location name or location text. All right. So now I can go inside my JavaScript file and again do location text equals to document dot get element by ID and paste that ID here. Okay. Now what we can do is location text dot inner text. This is the way we specify text that we need to set inside a particular element. There's also inner HTML where you can also specify tags like span tag and all. So let's just start with inner text for now. Let's just stick with inner text for now. Okay. Although that will remove this span tag over here, but I don't care right now. Okay. So what I'll do is inner text equals to, and I want the basically the element that is represented by the active location over here. So we do locations square bracket active location. All right. So with this, what will happen is, okay, let's see if it works or not. So hold on. So let's just change the first one to something else. Let's change it to Bangalore, and here let's change it to IN. Okay. So if I click on this button now, at first active location is 1. When I click on this button, active location becomes 0. Then we set the inner text of that location element to 0th element of the locations array, which is Bangalore, India, right? If I click on this button, it changes to Bangalore, India successfully. Okay, but this will not work anymore because this is now at 0 and there's nothing below 0, and it will give me an error. So if I go into the console and click it again, so it's now undefined, right? It didn't give me an error, but it's now undefined. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to write some kind of clamping function. So a clamping function is basically, if it goes below a certain limit, you cycle it back to the the maximum value. Okay, you basically set an overflow. So how we do it is, we write it here. So if active location is less than 0, then in that case I want active location to be like the last element of that array. So we can do that by locations dot, hold on, yeah, locations dot length -1, because arrays are 0 index, so the last element will be represented by length -1. So when it's less than 0, it will be set to -1. Okay, like so it will be set to the last element of that array. Okay, so now if I start clicking this button, I can cycle through these 3 values. Okay, all right. So similarly, now we want to work for the button right. Okay, so we can just copy paste this down here, and instead of button left, I'll change this to button right. Now active location in case of button right should be plus plus, and similarly the clamping will also change. This time it should be if active location is greater than the last element, that is length -1. So if active location is greater than length -1, then in that case I want the active location to be set to 0. All right. Okay, so now if I click left, it will go back, and if I click right, it will go forward. And now it's working, it's cycling through these 3 values. All right. Now we can do a slight cleanup here, and this is actually this doesn't make sense in such a small code piece, but if we like expand this to a very big interaction, then in that case this cleanup would make sense. So what I'll do is I'll write a function that would be responsible for basically handing over these changes in these variables to the HTML file. Okay, currently we are doing this with this one line, right? But this one line is being repeated over here as well. So in order to like remove that repetition, and like if it is being used in multiple places, this would become tedious, right? So I'll just declare a function to handle this, and I'll call it the render function. Okay, so the render function's work is to basically hand over these variable changes, whatever changes we are making on the variables using JavaScript, to the HTML file. Okay, so whatever changes you are making, just copy and paste these over to the render function, and whenever you want to show these changes on the website, just call the render function. Okay, so here is the function declaration, and this is the arrow function that I was talking about earlier, and here I'm calling that function. Okay, similarly here also I'll call this render function. All right, so now this should work the same way, right? And we also want so if you look at this at the start, you see New York US, right? But there's no New York US over here in the JavaScript file, so our data doesn't have it. But just because our HTML file had this dummy data, it is being shown there. So I don't want to do that. So in that case, what I can do is, first of all, let's just set this to 0, because it will always start at the first element, right? So at the very end, I'll just call the render function once, so that when the page loads, the whole like initial set of variables are shown on the website. Okay. So now when I refresh, it will always start at Bangalore, India, because that's the first element. All right. So this is how you make interactions using vanilla JavaScript. Okay. Now let's start with the React realm, and let's just move on to over there. Okay. If you want, I'll just share this to the gist that I shared yesterday as well. Okay. So let's just close this and start with what React is. And before we start, I want to tell you that we are not just going to be following the, like what I'm doing on my screen. I'll also teach you how to look up documentation and stuff. So for that only, that purpose only, I've just opened the React website itself. Just go to, Google and search for React and open the first page, and there in every library or programming language or framework website, you'll see a get started button. So that's where you always start on a documentation. So I'll just do the same. I'll click on get started, and I'll see what we can do at the get started section. So I want to start with a new React app, right? So I'll just click create a new React app, and inside there we'll see what all we can do. Okay, what the page instructs us to do. So at the first, it just tells us about different ways to use React in our applications. So before, from what the key takeaway from all this is that React is it's a JavaScript library that enables you to do these renders in an optimized fashion. And React offers you a unidirectional flow of data, and there's a lot of different stuff that you'll get to learn later on. But for now, we can just understand that what we did with JavaScript, React makes it easier. That's a layman term. Okay, that's a layman description. So the recommended tool chains that React tells us to use is, if you're learning React, start with create React app. So let's just start with that. Okay, and this is what we use even in an industry scenario as well. So what before I get into this, I'll touch a little bit on what Node.js is. So let's just create a folder for that. And so till now we saw how to execute JavaScript on the browser, right? So when we are running JavaScript on the browser, it is using some kind of interpreter in the back in the behind the scenes to basically process all these instructions line by line and convert them to instructions for the CPU. Okay, but this is happening on the browser itself. So these different browsers like Chrome and Mozilla, like Chromium and Mozilla, have their own different JavaScript engines, and each of these engines have a name. Okay, so Node.js, on the other hand, doesn't run on a browser. So there was this need to run JavaScript without the use of a browser in a server-based scenario, or when you're working on applications that are not browser specific. When you're working on applications for your desktop, for example. Okay, so in that case, Node.js comes to use. So let's just start by creating a JavaScript file again. I'll also call this script.js as well. And inside here, I'll just do a console.log, and I'll write hey again. Okay. So have you all installed Node.js? Is there anyone here who wasn't able to install Node.js?
Just one thing. When we select a language, so do we use JavaScript React or just JavaScript?
Sorry, I didn't understand. For language selection in where?
In the Visual Studio Code, like when I start a new file, I have to select a language. So
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript or JavaScript React?
You can select JavaScript as well. It hardly makes a difference.
Okay, thank
But
you.
usually, we work with extensions. So JavaScript React is a different extension, which is JSX. Okay, instead of using JS, we write JSX, and you see that this icon changes. Okay, so that's what JavaScript React is.
Okay, okay,
I'll get into that when we start with React. Okay. So,
okay.
I'll now want to run this without a browser, without an index.html file over here. So what I can do is, if you all have already installed Node.js, you can just open your terminal from going into terminal and new terminal. And in here, you can write node space script.js. Okay. And hit enter. And you'll see that the content of that JavaScript file is executed there. Okay. So this is what Node.js is used for. uh, there's also something that comes with Node.js that allows you to install different libraries. It's similar to what pip is in case of Python. So pip allows you to install different modules and libraries. Similarly, there's something called npm, that is the Node Package Manager, and this allows you to install library like Node.js libraries and modules onto your system, and also execute scripts that are a script is also basically a library, but it's executed whenever you call these commands, and it's not just installed as a library into your project. Okay, so we'll start with seeing we'll start with looking at what how to execute scripts in using npm. So in order to execute a script, the command that we use is npx and then the script name. All right. So this create React app is also a script that allows us to create a basic bare bones structure of our React application with ease. Okay. Since React is a library, you can obviously on your own as well create a whole folder structure and then install React, and then you can set up the whole project environment. But since this is a very repetitive task, there is a script for that, and this enables you to do this with ease, like just with a single command. So what I'll do is I'll just close out of this now, and I'll go back to my folder, and in here I'll open a terminal. And you can also just right click and open a terminal, or you can come over here and write cmd dot and hit enter, and that will also open the terminal for you. Okay. Inside here, you can write npx create react app, and then the project name that you want to give. So I'll write weather app. Okay. You can be more creative than me, obviously. So go ahead, feel free to name it anything you want, and then just hit enter. So what this will do is, if you have not used create React app before, then it will install this library. Like it said here, need to install the following packages. Then it will execute the React app script, and it will set up the whole project for you. So you can see in the background, it is creating that it's creating that particular folder for that project. And once it's installed, once it completes the process, I'll be able to open that folder in VS Code. So once it's done, you can write code space and the folder name, which is weather app, and hit enter, and that will open that folder in Visual Studio Code. Okay. All right. So let's start breaking down this whole set of files that the create React app script made for us. Okay. The first thing that we see here is node modules. So the node modules folder is basically the folder that stores all the project specific libraries. So these are the libraries that were needed for this particular project to work properly. Okay. So there's a lot of different libraries, and there's a lot of different, nested dependencies. So a library might need another library to function, or might need 4 more other libraries to function. So all of those libraries are installed over here. Okay. And why you're seeing node modules, even though this is a front end, React is used for a front end project, that is because when we are developing a front end project, we are essentially using Node.js as a to run that whole backend, to refresh the page whenever we are making changes, like like we were using live server for our HTML file. In here, there's a set of libraries that function to provide you these updates as you start making changes to these files. Okay. So that's why we use Node.js to even to develop a React project. So that's why we talked about Node.js before. Okay, moving on. The public folder basically contains all the static files that are going to be part of your project. So for example, the favicon that is shown on the title bar over here, and things like the HTML file. So this HTML file is basically okay. So before getting into this HTML file, let's move on, and I'll come to this later on. There are a few logos and a manifest.json that will not be touching for this this set of sessions. You can look into this later on. And then we have a robots.txt, which is used to instruct search engines about what this project is basically used for. Okay, moving on to the src folder. So this folder basically contains the whole project specific files, that the files that are actually important for the project. So as I said earlier, React is a JavaScript library, right? So in React, we do almost all of the things in JavaScript itself. So even the HTML markup that we are writing, we do that in JavaScript. And in case of when we are doing that, when we are writing HTML markup in JavaScript, we do that in a specific very specific specification, which is called JSX. So it stands for JavaScript XML. Okay, we don't need to you don't need to remember the full form of JSX. You just need to understand that JSX and normal HTML elements have a difference. Okay, so then we have the git ignore file, because this project because create react app automatically also starts a git repository in your project. And we have the package.json. So this is the file that keeps track of what all dependencies and libraries are being used in your project. So since this is basically a node project, the package.json keeps track of what all dependencies are present in your project. Okay, so by default we have these dependencies that create react app, and from now on I'll call it CRA. So these are the dependencies that CRA made for you. And then we have a few scripts. Okay, so we can use these scripts to start our project and see what's going around. So the way we do that is we write npm run start. And there's also a shorthand for start, because start is used very often. It's called npm start. You can simply write npm start, and that will also work, and hit enter. So now the whole project is being started, and once it starts, it will automatically launch in your browser. So now the project has loaded, and this is the basic project. Like this is the whole project that CRA creates for you by default. Okay, so let's see let's see each of the files that are coming into play here. So the first file that gets executed when we run this project is index.js. That's where everything starts. Okay, this is the entry point of the whole project. So if you remember, we just before using this, when we were working with vanilla.js, I wrote a render function, right? So in here as well, there's a render function that is being called, and this render function is actually responsible for showing everything on the screen. So how the whole thing happens, like how like React works, is that you do not need to worry about writing the code for showing things on the screen. Okay, React takes care of showing things on the screen by itself. So there's a lot of processing in the background that happens to to decide which things are changing on the screen at what time. And there's a lot of different algorithms for that. There's batching, and there's basically decision trees to figure out which nodes are to be refreshed, are to be re-rendered, to be precise. And that all happens using just this single library, and inside the library is just this single function. Okay, so I'll start with clearing out a very common misconception. So React is not responsible for showing things on your screen. Okay, React is a library that only handles the virtual DOM. Okay, it creates a virtual DOM. Now, what is DOM? So if you search for DOM, it will tell you that DOM stands for Document Object Model, and it is basically a tree that describes how your HTML or your page is structured. Okay, so when we are working on an HTML file, this whole thing is your real DOM. This is your actual DOM. But in case of React, like what React gives you is a virtual DOM. Okay, then you are responsible and you are free to decide which library you're going to use to to convert this DOM, this virtual DOM, into a real DOM. And that library, that difference of libraries, create these different frameworks, and different platforms basically. So when we want to render this virtual DOM to a web page, we use React DOM library. When we want to render this virtual DOM to a mobile phone, like to a mobile native UI, then we use React Native. Okay, so that's the difference. So the code so the logic to actually show the things onto the screen is handled by React DOM, and React only is responsible to tell React DOM that what all things are changing on the screen and what you need to show on the screen. All right. Okay. Then here they have imported index.css, which basically holds a bunch of CSS. So we can just remove this for now. All right. Then comes the important part. So if I remove this as well for now, this is just for analytics. So I'll just remove it for now and I'll clear this from here. So if you read this comment, you'll be able to understand what this is used for. Okay. So I'll also turn off autosave. All right. So how does this React DOM.render works? So the first parameter that it takes is the whole virtual DOM, the virtual DOM that is provided by React. So it takes that whole virtual DOM to be rendered, and then you need to specify where you want to put this whole tree, where in the HTML you want to put this whole tree. So the HTML file is present here. That's what I said that I'm going to return to this later on. So inside here you'll see that there is this divide root which is basically empty. Okay, so your whole when your whole React application is rendered, it is basically put into this div inside this divide root. Okay, that's what this get document.get element by id root is doing. It is providing a reference to where we want to put the whole DOM after it is rendered. Okay, now let's move on to the actual application, which is stored in which starts at the app, like app.js file. So here's the app.js file. And before moving to explaining what's going on here, I'll just clean this up a little bit and I'll remove all the unwanted files for now. So this is a file that is used for testing, and this is just a logo, and this is used to report analytics, and this is also used for testing as well, but I'll just leave it here for now. Okay. So now we're left with just index.css, app.css, app.js, and index.js. I'll also remove index CSS from here. Okay. So let's start with app.js. The first thing that they did was import the logo which was being used in the application. So I'll just remove it because I've already deleted that. Okay. And now we are left with this whole thing. And it's giving me an error because I removed the logo. So this line is not working anymore. So I'll just remove the image as well. Okay. So how React works is it's basically like the whole React language. Like I'm talking about the design language of React here. So the whole design language of React is basically split into components. Okay, so everything in React, every element that you see inside React is called a component. And what is a component? So a component is basically a bunch of UI and a bunch of business logic that goes with it. By business logic, I mean the behind of scenes logic that happen when you click on a particular element, or maybe it happens automatically when the page is loaded. So all of that logic is called the business logic. So a component is basically the building block of React. Okay, so you can if you have if you're familiar with Lego pieces, so each of the Lego pieces has serve a specific purpose, right? And each of these Lego pieces can be plugged into another Lego piece by the pegs that are present on those Lego pieces, right? And some Lego pieces might not go with other Lego pieces, and so on and so forth. So you can think of a component like a single Lego piece. It holds it has some shape, and it serves some purpose. Okay, so the app component is the entry point. It's a starting component, and it basically encompasses your whole application. All right, inside the app component, so a component is basically a function. So whenever we use a function to define a component, we call it a functional component. Okay, there was an earlier practice which is not used anymore to create components, and that was using classes. So when we used to use classes to create components, they were called class based components. Okay, but that is not used anymore because functional components are more optimized. So we use functional components only. All right. I prefer using arrow functions instead of functions here, like this way of writing functions. So I'll just change this to an arrow function. Okay. So this is how you change a normal function to an arrow function. That's it. And so what a component, let's look into the inside details of a component. All right. So what a component is, it's a basic function. So a function always returns something, right? If it's not returning anything, it returns a void. Okay. So what a functional component returns is it returns the UI that is like basically defines that particular component. So in case of the app component, it returns the whole application UI. Okay, this will hold the whole application UI. So you can see there's the div class name app, and then header, and inside the header you have the p tag and the anchor tag. So similarly, if you go over here and hit refresh, you'll see that you have the div id root first of all, and then you have the div class app, the header, the p tag, and the anchor tag, right? So this is your whole application, the app class. This is your whole application. Okay. So what's happening is basically React is sending this whole thing as a virtual DOM, as a virtual tree, and then React DOM.render is figuring out that for this particular JSX element, I need to show this particular HTML element. All right, I'll just zoom it a bit. So for this particular JSX element, it's showing this particular HTML element. Okay. So if you are familiar with HTML, you might know that these properties that we specify in an HTML tag are called attributes, and attributes have their own values, right? But in case of JSX, these are not called attributes, but these are called properties, or in short, props. Okay. And these props can also be defined by you, the programmer. Okay. So you can specify custom props as well, and those custom props can serve a specific purpose in your custom components. So let's just start by creating our very first custom component. Okay. So I'll start by first deleting this whole thing and writing a little bit of CSS as well. Okay. So what I'll do is, it's very similar to what we did yesterday. So what I'll do is I'll just copy that thing that we wrote yesterday in the style.css. Okay. So I'll copy this part, because this is something that I usually use in all of my projects. So, and obviously this font family won't work, but that's totally fine. But I've reset the margins and all, and the box sizing I've set it to border box. Now let's create our very first component. Okay. So app.js is a component, obviously. So I can write inside here hello, and that will basically show up here. But now let's start working on our own components. So what I'll do is I'll create a folder over here just to be a little organized. And this is the beauty of React, and this is the advantage of React over something like Angular, is that Angular is a framework, and it enforces you into a very specific folder structure and a very specific paradigm. So does Next.js. Okay. But in case of React, since it is a library, you're free to use any kind of folder structure you want. As long as it makes sense to you, you can create any sort of folder structure. So for this project, I'll just create a very simple folder structure. I'll add a folder called components. Okay. And inside there, I'll create okay, let's see what we can do here. We can create a card component. Okay. So I'll call this card.js. And so basically the idea behind components is that each component is used to serve a specific purpose. So each component has a different purpose, and it's only used for that particular purpose. Okay. So here, let's start writing our whole component. So the way we write components is we first write an arrow function. I'll name it card. Okay. And then we export it. So I'll write export default card. Okay. If you are familiar with Node.js, then you'll know that there are multiple different types of export. There's default export, and there's named exports. We are using default exports here because we don't have multiple things that are being exported from this file. Okay. So only this particular thing is being exported. That's why that is exported as default. Okay. Now inside the component, we want to return what UI we want to show for this component. Okay. So what I want is an article tag, and inside that article tag, let's see, I want an image, and an image should be an empty, like an image is not a container element. So if I save this right now, it will probably give me an error, or it may not. But an image. Since an image is an empty tag, this is the way you should use it. And it's giving me a squiggly line because images have a a few requirements that you need to satisfy in order for this to work properly. So VS Code is smart enough to suggest me those. So I'll add a src here. So let's just get a picture from Unsplash. I'll just pick this picture. Okay, so let's just open it and open image in new tab and copy it and paste it over here. So this should now work, but it's also giving me an elements. Image elements must have an alt prop, either with meaningful text or an empty string. But this is basically from a extension that I'm using, so I can ignore that for now. Okay. Then under here, I want to write some text regarding to this image. Okay, so I'll call this a div, and the text I want to write is Unsplash image for now. All right, I'm not being creative right now, so just let's just put this over here. So how do we now we have just created that component, right? But it's not showing up on our page. That is because it is not part of the app component, right? The As I said, the app component is the entry point of the whole application, right? So you need to somehow relate this card component to the app component. Maybe directly import it over here, or maybe import it in another component that you made, and then that component can be part of the app component. Okay, so you can have nesting as much as possible, like as much nesting as possible. So for now, I'll just import the card component from the location where I've put it. So I'll write dot slash components, and inside there's the card file. Okay. Now, the way we use components is very similar. It's literally identical to how we use normal JSX tags, like the default JSX tags that are similar to HTML tags. So we just open left chevron and write card and close it like this. Okay. With just this, you'll see that the component is now present here. Now, you won't be able to see where a particular component ends and the next component begins on a web page, but you as a programmer are now able to see that separation, and now you are also able to focus your development time on a particular component, and this basically eases your development practices as your development experience as well. Okay, so if you separate your whole application, if you break down your whole application into smaller goals, into smaller component, you can tackle each of these components one by one, and that way you'll be able to finish whatever project you wish to tackle with ease. Okay, now what I want is that this component, okay, let's just add a bit of style first, although this is not necessary. All right, let's just skip the style part for now, because the styling is not necessary. We are gonna delete this component after this anyways. Okay, so I'll tell you how to use custom props now. Okay, these class name and all these properties are specific to the default tags that are like the HTML tags that we have, right? So there's a lot of different attributes in HTML as well, and those attributes have their own corresponding props in React as well. Okay, you might see that the naming of these props are not in are not in kebab case, but in camel case, right? So in case of HTML, the on sub you might not have on, like you would not have these on props in HTML, but let's just see one that you might have in HTML. So default value. So you have this attribute in HTML as well, but in case of HTML, this is written as default hyphen value and not as default value like this. Okay. So these are the properties that are specific to this component or div element. Okay. So for this card component, we don't have any properties defined right now, but we can do that. So the way we do that is there are actually two ways. I'll tell you the easier way first of all. So we write prop over here. So props are basically is basically an argument that this card component will get, and this props is all the properties that this component will get when we use this component anywhere. Okay, so we are using this component in app.js. So here we can now specify as many properties as we want, and then we can use them over here using props dot and the property name. Okay, so the first property that I want to add is name, okay, or title. And the title would be here, I'll call it image1. Okay, inside here what we can do, instead of using unsplash image, which is a static text, I want to now use a JavaScript variable over here. Okay, because this props is basically a object, right? It's a JSON object which holds all the properties. If I console log this, I can also show this to you. So if I console log this props argument here, you'll see that in the console you have a JSON object that is defined, that is identified by these curly braces, and inside the JSON object you have this property called title, which we are getting from the app component. Okay, so the props are holding all the properties that are being sent to the card component. So now we want to use it. So in order to use any kind of JavaScript variables inside the return function, I mean inside the return statement inside the JSX, what we do is we use curly braces. Okay, this is this is the basically the rule that there is. So we use curly braces to write any kind of JavaScript inside our JSX. Okay, so now I can specify what I want to show here. So I want to show props or title. All right, so once I hit save, you'll be able to see that this name changes. Okay, I'll actually put this side by side so that you're able to see it. And okay, so now hold on. So now if I change this prop over here to maybe uh, mountains, so you'll be able to see that update over here as well. Okay, so you might be able to see right off the bat what are the advantages of doing something like this. Now if you want to use multiple cards, all you have to do is use multiple cards over here and specify different titles for these cards. So what this gives you is first of all a clean markup, a clean code. So wherever you're using a card, you're just using a single thing. You're not copy pasting the whole article tag and image tag and div tag. You're just copy paste, you're just repeating the card component. And inside the card component you can specify multiple different properties, and each of these different properties will show up on the web page properly, because that is all being handled by React. As I said, the rendering part is handled by React. You do not need to write any kind of render function like we did in Vanilla.js. Okay, so I'll just show that to you if you want. So I'll just name it A and I'll name it B. And if I save it, you'll see that there are now multiple different card components, and each of them have a different name, right? So all of this is handled by React in the like behind the scenes, and you do not need to worry about it. But so far also we are not doing anything new. We are just separating things into components, and that already gives us a lot of power. So now what I want to do is like I want to convert whatever we worked on yesterday into a whole React project now, but I want to break it down into components. So we'll now learn how to think about where we separate one component into like where we separate one component from the other. Okay, so I'll just open the Figma file that I had opened yesterday, and we'll see how we can separate these into separate the whole, break down the whole project into smaller goals. Okay, because this is a very important step in working on any project. Like if you try to tackle the whole page at once, you will face a lot of trouble. But if you break it down into different components, you'll be able to handle each of those components one by one with ease. Okay, does anyone have any questions so far? Any questions? Like this all might be very new to a lot of you. So do you have any questions?
No, bhai.
All right. Okay. So if anyone doesn't have a question, like let's just move on. So let's see how we can break it down into different components. All right. So as I said that we can also nest these components, right? So here we are using multiple cards, right? So what if I want to have a particular layout of these cards? So for that purpose, we can make a card grid component as well, right? And these components can be a container component, and then we can move this whole thing inside the card grid, and and yeah, and that's it. And this card grid would the purpose of this card grid component would basically be to enforce a particular layout. Okay, so instead of card grid, you might want to use a card column, and in that case it might be a column, or a card row, and in that case it can turn into a row. So the purpose of this sort of component must like can be to enforce a particular layout, and then inside that component we can have multiple components nested to show the exact data that we want, right? So that's what we use extensively in React. So let's just see how we can break this whole thing down into components. So the first two components that I see over here, like right off the bat, is the sidebar and the main content. These two can be two different components, okay? And inside the sidebar, let's just start looking at each of the different puzzle pieces. So the first thing that I see is the search bar. The search bar can be its own component, right? So it is actually its own component, and we're going to work on the search bar and its functionality separately on like I've dedicated a whole day for the search bar functionality. And then we can have a component that holds all of these data like all at once, right? And at the end we can have a location selector component as well, right? So let's just start with creating the search bar component, and then we can move on to the main component. I mean the sidebar component, and then we can move on to the main component. Okay, so I'll just clear all of this and this as well, and I'll remove this class name over here. So I'll actually refer to the HTML file that we made yesterday, and using that HTML file, I'll start working on my components. So I can just copy paste things from like here to there. Okay, so the first thing that we have is a main tag, right? So instead of using div here, I also want to use the main tag only. Okay, inside the main tag, if I could start collapsing these, you'll see that there are two different things, and these can also be thought of as components only, right? So there's the aside element, and then there's the section tag, right? So the aside is basically the sidebar, and this section is the main content. Let's just start working on the aside thing. So how we'll do it is, and before that, let's see what all things I have unnecessary that are open. So I'll just delete all of this. Okay, and I need to remove this, and that's it. Okay, so inside the components, I'll create two different folders. One is the sidebar, and I'll actually name it in caps. I'll actually use lowercase only for this, and another would be main, or you can call this stats if you want, because the right side basically holds all the statistics. Okay, so now the sidebar can have all the components related to the sidebar. So the first component inside here would be sidebar.js, and somebody, I think Ritvik, was mentioning about JavaScript React, right? So so
Yes.
JavaScript React is basically it's basically a JavaScript file, but code editors like VS Code identifies them in a separate as a separate kind of extension in order to enable features that are specific to React only. So that is what JavaScript React is there for. So because React is a very popular library, that's why like the VS Code has a separate extension made for it. So you can write JSX and hit enter, and this is basically a JavaScript React file. Okay, and it's no different from the JS file that we were working on earlier, but I'll still rename all my components to JSX in order to identify that which of my files are React components, and which of my files are normal JavaScript files that don't have a component inside it. Okay, so I'll just start the project again because it gave me an error due to this. And now we can start working on this. So what I'll do is, inside the sidebar, and actually you can use an extension to write the whole markup that we write, like the whole boilerplate, which is const sidebar equals to round brackets, curly braces, and then export default sidebar. So this whole thing, this can be replaced with a simple snippet, and for that you can use this extension. I think it's somewhere around here. I think it's called something like React ES6 snippets or something. Yeah, so it's this extension. you can install this extension, and it gives you basically a lot of snippets that you can use, which will like just like yesterday we did the exclamation, like we used the exclamation to generate a HTML markup, right? So this is also called a snippet. So similarly, we have a lot of snippets that are offered by this extension, and that you can use to easily create a component boilerplate. So how we do that is we write RAFCE. So this stands for React Arrow Function Component Export. So if we hit enter, it'll create that component and it will export it directly, and it will also name by the file name that is present, like that the file has, like whatever the file has as its name. Okay. Now for this like the starting tag, I'll use aside over here because that's what we did for the index.html as well. Okay. And let's just see what else was inside it. So inside the aside, we had a div search bar, right? So I'll just copy it as it is and see where things go wrong, or if it goes wrong. So I'll just paste it here and save it and see if that makes any changes. So yeah, so nothing's popping up because I've not used the sidebar anywhere, right? So you need to remember, like keep this in mind always. So I'll just import it now. Import sidebar from, and wherever the sidebar component is. So it's inside sidebar and here. So I'll just import it over here, sidebar. Okay. So now the search bar is has come up over here. Okay. Uh, okay. I'll talk about how to write CSS like later on. Like we'll for now we'll just copy and paste the whole CSS file that we made for the HTML over to our app.css, and this will work out of the box. Okay. So now you'll see the whole site like search bar is present, and it's not working properly right now because I've not added the main content section, right? So that's why it's taking the whole width right now, but that is totally fine. Okay, so the sidebar, like the bare bones sidebar is now created. So now I'll work on the stats component. So I'll name it stats.jsx. And this is actually the main content component that we were referring to till yesterday. Okay, so now inside this section, I'll just copy this whole. Okay, I'll not do like I'll not blatantly copy the whole thing. I'll go through it step by step. So I'll first of all do RAFCE, and inside here I'll paste this thing. Okay, and close the tag, and this is basically main content. Okay. Are you guys able to follow along, or are you like just looking at my screen? Like if you are not able to follow along, I can slow down. Just let me know.
Like I'm a bit stuck. I
Okay.
changed my name, like the app.js to app.jsx, and it's giving me an error.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like when you change the name of a file that is already being used now, then in that case, like CRA starts giving you an error. But what you can do is just come over to your terminal here, hit Control C, and then write that command again. So once you hit Control C, you can again write npm start, and it will start up again, and and then it won't give you an error.
Let me try that quickly.
Yeah, sure. So once you like make a basic bare bones stats component, we are gonna import the stats component as well.
Excuse me, I have a doubt.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, will you teach React.js with TypeScript?
We won't be covering TypeScript right now. Like if you want a session on TypeScript, we can like do that later on after React is covered properly.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay, sure. We can also talk about how we use TypeScript in React, but first, like we need to get a basic understanding of React itself, right? So I'll import the stats component here, and I'll also paste it. Like I'll also put that stats component inside the main tag, right? So now you'll be able to see that this is looking very clean. Like the main is basically the whole application, and inside there you have a sidebar and a stats, right? And your styles are being handled by the app.css. But just like we wrote the styles gradually in case of our HTML file, we can write the styles gradually over here in the app.css as well, right? If we are working on a whole new project, like not like in a workshop scenario like we are doing right now. Okay, so let's just start with a sidebar first of all. Okay, so now if you see this is looking similar to what we worked on in the HTML file, right? So I'll just start working on the sidebar now. So inside the sidebar, I put the search bar as it is, right? But I want that the search bar is a different component because we are going to add some business logic to it later on. Like I said, business logic is basically the logic, the JavaScript logic that works behind the scenes. So we are going to add business logic to it later on. So I'm going to create a different component for the search bar because the search bar is a whole new thing. Like it serves a very different purpose from the sidebar. So what I'll do is I'll add a searchbar.jsx inside this folder only because the search bar will reside inside the sidebar only. And what I'll do is I'll do RAFCE and paste this whole thing over here. And if you want, you can also download this extension. It speeds up things a lot. Okay. So I've pasted the sidebar, the search bar in the search bar component, and now I'll import it in the sidebar component this time. Okay, so I'll do search bar from /search bar. Okay, and this goes here. So you can see that we are nesting all of these components and we are creating a cleaner markup than what we did in this case. Like if I expand this and I give this to someone like who hasn't worked on this project before, he'll take a time, like he or she'll take a while to understand what's going around and what each of these like elements are for. But if I give this to someone, they'll be able to understand easily that there's a sidebar and there's a stats section, and in the sidebar we have a search bar and so on and so forth. So this creates a cleaner markup, right? So inside the search bar, we won't be working on anything extra right now. So let's just move on to the next section, which is so the next section was basically the basic info section, right? So I want to combine this whole thing into a single component because all of this is basically data. So we can create a component for it, or we can write this directly here. So I'm being lazy, so I'll write it directly in sidebar only. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll copy that thing from index.html, and it was somewhere around here, right? So yeah, so from here actually, this is the SVG that we are using for that weather icon. So from there, I'll copy all the way down to the description tab. I'll copy this and paste it in the search bar sidebar component, and you'll be able to see all of that now rendering over here. Okay, I'll use this term render a lot because it is something that React does a lot behind the scenes. That's why. Okay, now we want that final location selector, and for that location selector also there's going to be some business logic, and that location selector is also serves a different purpose. So I'll create a component for that. Excuse me. So I'll write location selector .jsx, and inside this I'll do RAFCE, and I'll copy the I'll directly copy the div tags and all from here. Okay, this is the whole location selector, so I'll paste it inside the location selector file and save it. Now there's a lot of things open over here, so I'll just close a bunch of stuff like the stats component and the search bar component because we don't need that right now, and then move on to the sidebar. Now I missed actually one thing, and this is a very critical thing in case of React. Although it doesn't show up as an error anywhere, but it does make a difference when we used to use class-based components. So React gives us a lot of warnings for it. Okay, these are the warnings related to some SVG attributes that we copied out directly. But as I said, the attributes have their identical, camel case properties in React, right? So we need to change these attributes that are present in the SVGs to these property names. Okay, so I'll do that later on. But the first thing that we missed is that we named instead of using class name like the CRA was doing at first, I named all of these, I gave all of these classes using the class property, and the class property doesn't exist exactly. Okay, it used to exist earlier. That is why it's not giving us any kind of error, but it's basically deprecated now, and no one basically uses class in case of React, because it's very easily confused with the class keyword that we use for creating classes in JavaScript, right? Like instead of using a function, when we create a class, we also write class, and class can be like a student class or anything you want. So since class is another keyword in JavaScript, that is why in React, instead of using class, we use class name. Okay, and this serves the same purpose, except that it's named differently, right? So this is the only property that is not identical to its HTML counterpart, but that's it. So just keep this in mind. Everywhere you use class, don't use class, use class name. Okay, so how I'll do it is, I'll actually go to find and replace, and I'll search for everywhere I use the class keyword, and I'll actually make it a little more specific. So I can see that it's being used in a lot of different files, right? So I'll just replace this, like, okay, I can't do this everywhere. I need to do this one by one. All right. Okay, so I'll start with location selector. I'll come here and search for class and replace this by class name. Okay, place and save. And then I'll come over here, and since this is already class name, I'll change it. And I'll search again for class and replace it by class name, right? So this is now class name. And similarly, I'll come into sidebar and change class to class name everywhere. So now everywhere there was the class keyword, the class property, we are now using the class name property. And I'll save it. And inside the stats as well, I'll call it class name. Okay. All right. So with this, we can now work, get back to work. So as I was saying, we were working on the location selector now, right? So I've pasted everything that the location selector has as part of its markup in the location selector component. And I'll now import it in the sidebar component. So instead of importing and then using a particular component, you can use basically use VS Code, and VS Code will actually suggest you all the components that you have made. So once I write location, you'll see that location selector is coming up over here, and if I hit enter, it will automatically import it over here. Okay, so that's one thing that you get from using an code editor like VS Code, or I think it also happens in case of Sublime and Atom. Okay. So now the location selector is also here. All right. And this time around, I want to remove these IDs because we are not going to use vanilla JavaScript to, add those interactions now, right? So these IDs are not needed. We're going to talk about interactions later on, but today we'll just create the whole UI and even try to complete all of those cards now. Okay. So let's just move on to the stats section now, and I'll create the stats section now. So I'll collapse this aside tag, and I'll expand this section tag. So the start section has a header, and I'll create a different component for this header because the header has a specific purpose that it contains that metric switcher button, right? So it'll use to switch the unit from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So I'll create a header here, header.jsx, okay, and I'll do RAFCE. Inside here, I'll paste this. Now, keep in mind, this header variable, like variable or function, whatever, in JavaScript, functions are also very similar to variables. So like this header variable and this header keyword that is used in this JSX is different because this one has an uppercase H and this one has a lowercase h. Okay, so that is why we name custom components by an uppercase H, because if there is any overlap between our component names and the default component names, then that can be avoided if we use an uppercase H. Okay, so we I've imported the header component over here and pasted the whole thing. Exported, and then we can import it over the start section. So I'll just write header, and that gets auto imported. and we can see it over here. And similarly, let's just move on to the next thing. So then there's today's highlights, and I'll just paste it directly in the stats. Okay, are you guys able to follow?
Yes, sir.
All right, okay. All right, so after the start section, like after the heading, I'll need to add these cards, right? So for these cards, what I've thought of is to create separate components for each of these cards, because each of the cards have a different kind of data and each of the card has a different kind of layout, right? So that's what I'm going to do now. So what I'll do is inside the stats, I'll create different components for each of these cards. Okay, but first of all, I'll just paste it as it is here, so I'm able to actually see, at least see these cards over here. Okay, so this completes the whole UI that we did yesterday, till yesterday. We covered till yesterday. So I'll just close this index.html now, because it has served its purpose. So now we can start working on each of those cards. So let's see what we can name each of them. So this can be called the temperature card. This can be the wind status card, the sunrise sunset card, humidity, visibility, and air quality. Let's start with temperature. Okay, I'll name it. Or if you want, you can also organize these into, you know, a card, add a cards folder, and then inside there you can do stuff. But I'll just since there are like very few set of components, so I'll just do it directly over here. So I'll write it. So I'll name it min max temp .jsx. Okay, and do RAFCE, and then I'll copy this article tag over to here. Okay, and here, instead of using article, I'll write min max temp. Okay, it's as easy as that. Whenever you want to split a component into two different components, just copy the divs that you want to extract into the new component and import that component here. So when the render function is called, like when the react dom.render function is called, what happens is it recursively goes through each of the components and sees what all markup it needs to generate. So first of all, it comes to the app component. It sees the main tag and it generates the main tag in HTML. Then it goes into the sidebar component, and inside the sidebar component, it sees all of these all of this markup, and it generates that. And it also sees the search bar component, so it goes inside there and it generates that. So this actually how it works is, I'll actually open Paint for this. So how it works is, so this is your entry point. Okay, let me increase the size. Suppose this is your entry point of this is the app.js, basically app.js. Okay, so how it works is, from app.js you might have different components. We have two different components, sidebar and stats. So that's what I'm showing here. Inside sidebar you have two different components. Inside stats you have multiple different components, right? And inside one of these components you might have two different components, right? So what it does is it goes it goes recursively through each of these nodes. Basically at each of these points there is a node, there is a component. Okay, and inside that component there are multiple components. So it goes through each of those components and it sees what is contained inside the return statement. Okay, and it basically renders and it basically converts all of that into HTML markup. Wait, is the canvas size small? Yeah, okay. So it basically converts that into an HTML markup. Okay, so how it works, how it goes is, it goes def first for it. If you have read about data structures already, like you would understand what def first means, since this is basically a tree data structure. So it goes as deep as possible, renders everything in that particular branch. So in this particular branch, it renders everything. Then it comes back one step over here. It goes to the next branch, renders everything. Then it comes back over here, okay? Then it goes into this branch and this branch, renders everything. Similarly, it goes here and here, and so on and so forth. Like it does that recursively until and unless the whole like render process has completed. Okay, so that's how the render basically works. Like it does a lot of stuff behind the scenes as well, but this is how it basically works. Okay, all right. So we were working on the stats component, right? So I created the min max temp. Let's just work on its design now. So it has a title on the top, and then an icon, HR, and two divs. Okay, let's just create that. we won't be able to create all of these. Let's just focus on creating the first three for now. So here I'll use a h2 tag for the title, okay, and I'll name it min max temperature, okay. Inside here I'll also add an svg, this svg to be precise. So I'll copy this svg and paste it, okay. And I'll also add the hr tag. And so this hr and this svg is basically in a horizontal layout, so we'll use flex for that. So I need a div to use that flex box, and we'll put that hr and the svg in a flex box, okay. And before that div, we'll have a div that will hold this whole temperature. So we'll have a div and that will hold the temperature. I'll first of all just hard code this temperature, then I'll show you the use of the benefit of using components. So I'll hard code this for now. Use a span tag, and inside there I'll paste this max, okay. And then similarly I'll use another div at the bottom of this separator, and I'll change this to 19 and min, okay. With this, we'll have all of the data over here, and let's just start styling it. All right, app.css. And inside the main, we need to name it something because this card is a specific card. So I'll name this card exactly like the component's name. So I'll call it min max temp. Okay. And inside here, I'll use it a class and start styling each of its elements. So the first thing is the h1. I'll use a font size of 18 pt. I think that would be a little too big, but let's see. Yeah, it's a little too big. So let's use 14 pt. And why is it not working? Because I've used class, I guess. Let's see. I've used h1 here, but I've actually used h2 in the markup. So let's just change this to h2 and this will work. Yep, it's working now. So let's just change it to 16 pt and see how it looks. And it looks a little too big. So I'm sorry about this. Let's just use 14 only. And then I'll reset the font's weight because this is currently bold, right? So for changing bold to a normal weight, we'll use font weight and we'll use normal. Okay. Normal is also equal to 400. So you can also use 400 as well. So now this weight has resetted. And now I'll use a color of hash 888. All right. And the whole card actually has a padding. So the padding is 32 all around. Okay. So I'll add the padding over here as well. So each of those cards will have that padding. So I'll do that in the article tag, which was the card actually. So I'll use a padding of 32 px, or you can also use 2 rem because 1 rem is equals to, actually, let's just do that. Okay. So I'll use 2 rem. Okay. So this adds a padding of 32 px all around. And this looks a little too much for me. So I'll just change this to, 1 rem. And now it's looking good. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next thing. So in min max temp, I have that separator, right? But there's no way to distinguish which is the separator. So I'll use a class name of separator. Okay, and the separator will have a display flex property and an align item center. Okay. And like with just this, you'll be able to see that this should be aligned properly, but it's doing something weird as well. And that is coming from the separator property, the separator class that we put in earlier as well. So somewhere around here, we also have another separator, and that is messing up the whole thing. So the way we can fix it is since it was around inside sidebar, we can actually put it inside the aside tag. So now this separator won't affect this separator. Okay. So we have the HR, and the like the HR has like a width of 2 by 2 right now, so it's not properly visible. Like even though it is there, like if I zoom in, I'll be able to see that. So let's just set a width of let's just set a width of something to it. So the width over here is 96, so I'll set that width over here as well. So inside the separator, right? So what I'll do is I'll copy this selector again. And if repeating these selectors is getting too much tedious for you, there is something called SCSS that you can look into, and that way you won't have to repeat these selectors a lot. Like in SCSS, you can nest selectors. You can write selectors inside here as well, and that also works. So instead of writing a new selector like this in SCSS, you can write it like this, and that works. Okay, so currently we are not using SCSS, so I'll just do it like this. I'll use a width of 96px. Now it's coming properly, and the border should be 1px solid black. Okay. All right. Let's see how it looks, if it looks consistent with the UI or not. And there's a slight margin, like a margin from the icon. So I'll add a margin left, or a margin, a margin left of 1 rem. And it's not working for some reason. Let's see why it's not working. So since it is in a flexbox, we can also add the gap property that we discussed yesterday. So I'll use a gap of 1 rem. Okay. Hold on. Let us see why this is not working. So this is inside a flex. Okay, I need to refresh this because there was an error. So yeah, at times CRA gets stuck in some kind of error. So like all you need to do is refresh if your properties are not coming up, and it'll start working automatically. All right. So so the gap is now there. So now let's style these elements as well. So in the H2, I'll add a margin bottom of 2 rems. And then I'll style the divs. So in min max temp, inside the div, and let's just confirm that these are divs only. Yeah. So inside the divs, I can write font size of 18 pt, and let's just see how that looks. We can increase it a bit, so we can set it to 24 pt or 26 maybe. Okay, so yeah, so 24 looks good. So I'll just use 24 pt, and then for the span, I can use min max temp span, and for font size, we can use 12 pt. Okay. So now it's looking like somewhat similar to what we had over here, right? There's also some margin from here, so I'll just calculate that and add that to the margin left property. So let's just see how much margin we want. We want it to be flush with the HR line, right? So the HR is how much? It's 24 plus the gap that is over here, that is 16. So that would be 24 plus 16, it's 40, margin of 40 px. So that's what I'll add to the div. I'll add a margin left of 40 px. And okay, hold on. So this is also affecting the separator div. So what I can do is instead of putting it over here, I can what I'll do is I'll reset that margin for the separator div specifically. So I'll set it again to margin left 0. So that way, this is now looking exactly similar to how it was in the designs, right? There's also a font weight, so you can go ahead and add that as well. So I'll do that right now. Font weight of bold or semi-bold. Hold on. So semi-bold is around 700, so I'll just use 700 for now. And you must have noticed that this font is not the font that we were using yesterday, and that is because I have not imported that over here. So I'll do that as well. So for that, I'll open that index file again. And inside the head tag, you'll see the Google Fonts Google font style sheets that were linked yesterday. So I'll just copy those and I'll paste these in the public folder inside this index.html that was specific to React. Once I do this, the fonts would now be loaded, and now this is looking exactly similar to the designs. All right. Now, let's just you can do a few more tweaks if you want to make it look exactly similar, but this is looking fine for me. Let's just now start working on the React stuff. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to send this min max temperature as a property to this component. Okay, so I'm able to control those values from inside the stats component. All right. So that's where we use the min max temperature card, right? So I want that I can specify min temp equals to some value and max temp equals to some value over here, and it reflects inside this component. So for that, I'll use props. So instead of using props, which is basically an object, as I showed a while back. So like instead of using props, we can destructure these props and use the exact properties inside this object. So what is meant by destructuring? If you look at object destructuring, so you'll be able to see what destructuring basically means. So destructuring comes in both flavors for arrays and objects. So if I can look for object example over here. Yeah, so here they've defined a user JSON. JSON is basically JavaScript object notation. So it's basically an object. So here a user object is defined which has an ID and is verified. So you can take out those properties from inside the user by destructuring the user like this. Okay, you use curly braces and then you name the specific properties that you need to take out from the user object. And now these properties are variables. These are not properties anymore. You don't need to use them using user.id and user.isVerified. You can use them directly. So we can do that here as well. So I'll use curly braces. Instead of props, I'm using curly braces to destructure the props, and I'll take out min temp and max temp. Okay, then I'll use these min temp and max temp values in here. Okay, so I'll use curly braces and I'll put min temp, or sorry, this should be max temp. So I'll put max temp, and down here I'll put min temp. All right, with this, this should give an error, hopefully. Okay, it's not coming up here. That is because now these properties are being used, but these are not being sent from the stats component, right? So since they are not being sent, basically JavaScript is understanding that they are undefined, and React is converts undefined into empty strings. So that's what's happening here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to send those values. So I want that min temp should be an integral value. It should be an integer, or it can be a float or anything, but I don't want them to be like I don't want them to be a string, right? Because we can send any kind of JavaScript value as properties as well. Instead of sending a string, I can obviously send strings, and that should probably work, right? They are working. But in cases where we want to send more than just single variables or values, we in cases where we want to send a complete array or a complete object as a property, so in those cases we want to use JavaScript here. So again, to use JavaScript in JSX, we use curly braces. So I'll put a curly braces over here, and I'll put any value I want. So for min temp, I'll put 20, and then for max temp. And to see what all properties are present in this particular component, you can hit Control and space at the same time, and you'll see all the properties. So this is the max temp property that we defined, and this key property is basically common to any React component. Okay, custom components and default components as well. We'll touch this key component later on as well. But for now, let's just use max temp and assign a value of 25 degrees Celsius. Okay. On that note, on the note of degree Celsius, we also want to send the unit from here, right? So I'll just send the unit from here, and I'll extract that unit over here, and we'll use this unit over here. So now you can see the flexibility that we are getting, right? So in order to change the unit in two different places, all I need to do is change the unit over here. And once I do that, I'll just move this to my other screen. And once I change it to F and now hit save, you'll see that these get updated to F. Okay. So that's the power that's the control that you get from using components. So I think we can stop right here for today, and we can work on the other cards as we progress further, as we start integrating the APIs and as such. Or if you want, you can have a look at the design. And since we have already discussed almost all the practices that we have for that we use in CSS, you can start working on these different cards on your own and see if you are able to work, create all of these cards. I mean, some of these are very simple, like this one, and this one is very simple. But just give all of them a try, and try to brush up your CSS skills as well, in that process. So I think we can stop here for now. And if you guys have any questions now, you can feel free to ask me.
No, we're all clear.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. So if no one has any questions, you're free to leave, and thank you for being here.